Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Hello and welcome to this week's Climate Coordination RCAST. We are talking this week about several different climate-related and technology-related matters that we think are highly relevant to the community and beyond. So I'll just get started with the first story. This is from CNN, and I found this one very recently because it's only from yesterday, September 16th. So I think I came upon it yesterday. And this is about the Paris Agreement. And I think it's important to talk about this agreement because we have a new climate summit coming up, COP26, which is going to be coming up soon. And I think it's important for people to know what is going on with the world's drawdown efforts and emissions. And I'm telling you, it's not good. Unfortunately, we haven't quite cracked this coconut. It says here, not a single G20 country is in line with the Paris Agreement on climate. Basically, the 2015 Paris Agreement gave a large number of countries a sort, not necessarily a mandate, but basically like it was like a mutual goal of trying to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius with the hope of limiting it to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But anyway, it says here it's a watchdog called Climate Action Tracker, which analyzed the politics of 36 countries, as well as the 27-nation European Union. And it found that all major economies were off track to contain global warming to 1.5. There were some low emission countries. They said that Gambia was one of the only nations among the 37 to be 1.5 degrees compatible. The study really was the study of the bigger emitters. So it says that there could be more lower income countries that are in line, which doesn't surprise me. But they don't really have more information about that. But it does say that the Paris Accord was an agreement between more than 190 countries. And obviously scientists have said that 2 degrees is a threshold, like 2 degrees Celsius of heating is a critical threshold for some of the Earth's ecosystems. And obviously this is, at 2 degrees, you're looking at triggering a lot of other feedbacks, which can be really dangerous and pretty much impossible to reverse. So anyway, the COP26, which is happening in Glasgow, Scotland, is happening in less than 2 months. There's a sort of theme there to, quote, keep 1.5 alive. I guess a lot of people are really still trying to keep this limit in place. But it looks like it's going to be pretty hard. I don't think that it's a totally lost cause because you never know what's going to happen in the world and miracles happen all the time. I'm really, I think every fraction of a degree is going to be better, that we keep it down. Like if it ends up being 1.8, that's certainly much better than 1.9 and so forth. Anyway, here it says 6 countries, including the UK, have an overall climate policy that is, quote, nearly sufficient, according to the report, meaning they are not yet consistent with 1.5, but could be with small improvements. The UK's targets are in line with 1.5, but its policies in practice don't meet the benchmark. So I think this is something they're going to see that's really common, is that a lot of these wealthier countries have, great plans written down. They make a lot of promises in the future, but in practice, those ends have not been met. So basically, there's this sort of drawdown hope or dream that's on paper, that's been agreed to, or that's been agreed to as a goal or an ambition. But in real life, there's some space there between that and where we are. It says the overall climate plans of the US, European Union, and Japan are not sufficient to reach the 1.5 degree goal, saying that while their domestic targets are relatively close to where they need to be, their international policies are not. So obviously that gets into some more complicated stuff about, probably, I would guess, international trade and possibly travel and some other stuff. I'll just say one more thing here. It says, under the Paris Agreement, countries submitted their pledges to cut emissions, also known as nationally determined contributions, or NDC. All signatories were supposed to update their NDCs by July 31st this year. Under the Paris Accord, there's still more than 70 countries that have yet to submit an update. India, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey are among countries that missed the July 31st deadline. China, the world's biggest polluter, announced a new target but hasn't formally submitted it to the UN. So obviously, people are not necessarily, taking this possibly as seriously as they need to be. And also, I think, another problem is that it seems like just with the paperwork that needs to be submitted, a lot of this stuff is getting sort of administrative rather than sort of logistical. And I think that's probably a big distraction to achieving the actual goal, is probably just the administrative, stuff, the bureaucratic stuff. So anyway, it goes into more stuff about the future, but I have another article that talks more closely about that. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, as you're kind of going through this article, it kind of conjured up another article I discovered this week from the New York Times called "Do We Need to Shrink the Economy to Stop Climate Change?" For me, that's kind of like one of the big questions, is like, can we get to that 1.5 degree with the green rush, as our Green Party candidate here in Canada called it, or do we need a phase shift in humanity's perception of progress and growth? I'm curious to hear what you both think about that question.
I don't know if we need to shrink the economy, but we definitely need a phase shift. And I think that, whatever needs to be done is the right thing, right? Because we can't buy another planet. There's no other place where we can live immediately. There's no other place where we can have an economy. So it's like, if it does come to degrowth economically, I think it's going to be difficult for people, because it's like, you save money and the money grows in the market, and that is how you retire. You have, the market is constantly growing. So, I think that there's going to be possibly some pretty tricky years up ahead if it comes to that. But obviously it's worth it, because it's nothing more valuable than, the planet, having a place to live. So
Yeah, like this article talks about the whole degrowth movement. In the view of degrowthers, it says humanity simply does not have the capacity to phase out fossil fuels and meet the ever-growing demand of rich economies. At this late hour, consumption itself has to be curtailed. And so it's almost like I'm not that versed in the whole degrowth movement, but part of the skimming through the article kind of conjures up thoughts about in Star Trek Next Generation. Someone pointed out to me, after this was back when it was first out, I was, watched a few episodes, and I remember somebody at work kind of pointed out to me that, there's no money in the future, according to Star Trek Next Generation. And it kind of made me think about it. It's like, wow, that's really fascinating.
yeah, I mean, that is fascinating. But I mean, people really, I think a lot of people are starting to question the value of money in the future, when you can't buy the stuff that you need. Like, if you need clean air, you could be very wealthy and you won't be able to buy it. I mean, of course, you can probably move somewhere else or whatever, but at some point, these these building blocks for life are so invaluable in our universe that you wonder, clean air, food, soil, you can't really put a price on that stuff, right? And also once it's gone or once it's, messed up, it's very hard to fix the problem with money, because it's nature and nature doesn't care about money. I mean, of course, early on you can mobilize money to mobilize people, and do stuff like that. But at a certain point, if the ice is melted, what are you going to do? You can't grow ice. I mean, like, what are you going to do with that? So I think that's a valid question.
I think I was really struck a few weeks ago by your analogy of the Earth having a fever. That the temperature rise is something that we can understand if we think of it like a fever. And I personally do not think that the degrowth is going to happen until people begin to feel the pain of the sickness that the Earth is experiencing, undergoing. And then people will be forced to stop the growth mentality because the infrastructure that creates this kind of strange lifestyle is going to collapse. And I wish that there was another way, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think people can grasp it. And so this is very much like, having an illness.
Right. You don't want to stop. You don't want to rest until you've literally collapsed. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much it. And so I think the Earth is going to get to a certain fever temperature, and hopefully that fever temperature knocks the virus down a peg or two. The virus being us.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we can, stop being a virus and start being a more contributory, a participatory member of the planet Earth ecosystem. Otherwise, there just won't be a place for humans.
Or maybe we could say the virus is our behavior and our choices. Maybe it's not us.
Oh, that's a good way of saying it. I like that.
Because, for thousands and thousands of years, humans have been living on Earth. And it's only very recently that we start to see these big problems. Of course, you could point to population growth, but I don't think that's it alone. I really don't think that's, and also something I see on Twitter all the time is people tweet, it's easier to imagine the end of the Earth than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And, I think that's very true to some extent. Hopefully we don't have to actually see that come true, but I can understand why people say that, which is in line with what you just said, that people are going to be forced to imagine things going a different way once they really feel the pain themselves.
Yeah. I mean, like when Paris was, not Paris, when Texas was covered in snow, right, and cold, and the infrastructure began to collapse, then people began to ask important questions. And unfortunately, it's going to take more and more of those events on a sustained basis before people go, oh, I see.
Yeah, we're not going to figure this out proactively. It's going to be reactionary, it looks
unfortunately.
like.
Well, we've had a chance. I mean, we've had a long time, my entire life since the 90s, people have been talking about these problems. And, we've had a chance to do it slowly. And clearly we've messed that up. So, we did have an alternative way to do it. If people wanted the slow, incrementalist solution, well, fine. That should have been put in place in like 1995 then, or 85.
I mean,
whatever.
Darryl was talking about this. What was the name of the woman, the scientist who discovered the greenhouse properties of carbon dioxide. What was her name?
Oh
The
yeah.
scientist.
I can't
It was
remember
like,
her name now.
it's
Yeah, in the
like near,
1800s. Yeah.
yeah, nearly 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Very simple
sure.
experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've had a long time to figure this out. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, then this woman is like doing science that can change literally the course of global civilization. She probably doesn't even have the right to vote,
Yeah.
whatever. It's
Yeah.
just like, huh, it's all just,
Crazy.
it's all
Oh,
crazy.
crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess like if you believe Jeremy Rifkin, and his excellent book, The Green New Deal, he kind of really gets into quite a lot of detail as to how, at least at the current state, um, we could use the current models of progress to help curb the tide and shift to a new economy through green technology. And it is what is happening. We're seeing that happening. But I agree that that's maybe the first baby step, but we need to literally change our model. In that article that I posted, it refers to a book called Donut Economics, written by this woman named Kate Raworth. And it just says here, in Donut Economics, she sets out 7 key ways to fundamentally reframe our understanding of what economics is and does. Along the way, she points out how we can break our addiction to growth, redesign money, finance, and business to be in the service to people, and create economies that are regenerative and distributive by design. So I'm going to stick that on my
Sounds like
reading list.
socialism, Darryl. Sounds like socialism.
Uh-oh.
No, but I think, yeah, I would love to read that book, and I'm just joking. I think yeah, I mean, I think there's probably going to be a lot of pushback in the coming, years and decades, potentially, about different models. Already there's such huge and ferocious debate about just basic, human dignity, issues that touch basic human dignity. And I think that we're going to see more debate about how we can repair our systems to honor that basic human dignity, especially in the face of the really just the cruelty of the climate crisis, which takes away a lot of people's dignity, especially in poorer countries. And I think that's going to be a major topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you speak, it makes me think about the type B corporations that we have registered at RChain. Because again, it's kind of like, maybe it's not a phase shift or a sea change, but it's certainly good baby steps to have that type of a structure now in our laws where you can create a for-profit company that allows you to put other things on the priority list.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
isn't it so funny that our corporate structure in America, says, oh, you're not allowed to prioritize anything except for money unless you filed these simple papers. And then it's just very funny to me. But I agree with you that it's great that we did that.
Yeah, it's a good first step, I think.
Sorry, Greg, were you going to say something?
Oh, no. Yeah, no, it's all good. All good.
Okay. Well, I do have one more article I wanted to share today, and then Darryl, maybe we can turn it over to you. But this is from Scientific American. This is from September 9th. And this sort of relates to the other article that I saw, but this is sort of an update on the decarbonization carbon budget. The carbon budget is really, really important to understand. It's basically just a raw amount of carbon that we can emit and then hope to basically have a coin toss chance, 50% chance of staying to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The carbon budget is not talked about very much, which is too bad, because I think it's the simplest way of understanding climate. It's like, okay, how much more paste can come out of the tube? That's really the question. And I think it's a pretty easy way to understand what's going on. Anyway, I'll just read a little bit from this article because it has some really, really, really good points and clarifies quite a bit of information about where we are now. The headline is abandoning 60% of global oil and gas might limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Coal production needs to have already peaked, and oil and gas production must steadily decline for even a 50% chance of meeting that target. The majority of the planet's fossil fuel reserves must stay in the ground if the world wants even a chance, literally, at meeting the most ambitious climate targets. A new study published yesterday in the journal Nature found that 60% of oil and natural gas and a whopping 90% of coal must remain unextracted and unused between now and 2050 in order for the world to have at least 50% shot at limiting warming to 1.5. So obviously, this is a tricky thing to do, but I don't think it's completely hopeless. I think it's very likely we'll blow past that, but I don't think it's totally out of the question. I wanted to read a little bit more. Talks about the Paris Agreement, talks about, that 2 degrees Celsius is much worse than 1.5, even though it's just half a degree. Of course, we all know that. It says here, the world has already warmed by more than a degree Celsius since the start of the industrial era, which began about 150 years ago. A landmark UN report on climate change released last month by the IPCC warned that the 1.5C mark could be reached within 2 decades. So this is rapidly approaching. To even have a 50% chance of meeting the target of 1.5, the UN report suggests the world can emit only about 460 billion metric tons of additional CO2 in the atmosphere. So basically that is the carbon budget, is 460 billion metric tons. Obviously that's a number that's very hard to understand, but it says here that's another 12 years or so of emissions at the rate at which the world is currently going. So this carbon budget by Scientific American, I guess that might be the figure that came from the Nature journal, but that's giving us 12 years. Most publications that I've seen have given us about 8 years of current emissions. 12 is definitely more. So, but of course, that's only at current emissions. So the hope is that the emissions will dramatically fall between now and then. It says here the study started with a carbon budget of about 580 billion metric tons, which is more. That's based on an earlier IPCC report from 2018. So now we have a smaller budget, obviously, because we've burned a lot since then. Also, it says the model suggested that steep cuts in fossil fuel production are necessary between now and 2050, obviously. And then there's, let's see, did this one have a graph? No, but there is basically, it's just like it's a very steep decline in emissions that we have to start making basically right away as soon as possible. And that steep decline between now and the future is used to be more narrow, but now that we've emitted so much and the 1.5 is getting closer and closer, that line, the declining emissions over time is becoming steeper and steeper, and now it's almost straight down. Just say one more thing here. In much of Europe, the United States, and Russia, for instance, gas production must peak now. On the other hand, gas production may continue to increase for a time in other parts of the world. The Middle East, Africa, and certain parts of Asia might see gas production increase until the 2030s before beginning to fall. Altogether, oil and gas production must decline by about 3% each year through 2050, the study found. So declining at 3% a year is a pretty rapid reduction. But obviously, every bit helps. And one final comment here that I thought was interesting. Many regions with the largest fossil fuel reserves must keep proportionately large shares of those resources in the ground. Canada, for instance, must keep 83% of its extractable oil in the ground, compared with about 38% in Russia and other former Soviet states. So that sort of lays it out for anybody who wants to know about the carbon budget.
Wow. Yeah. Good article. There's hope, when I imagine the possibilities of reducing that much. One thought goes to another article I read about how New York City is going to ban gas cars by 2030. You will not be able to buy a gas car in New York City in 2030. And when I first kind of read that, I'm like, oh, that's great, good for them. And then I thought, the market's already going to do that. Like, you are about to experience in the next 2 to 5 years an explosion of electric vehicles in the market. Every single car company except Toyota is aggressively pushing electric vehicles at very competitive prices now. It is going to happen so fast. And what's going to happen, because these car companies have such massive marketing budgets, is they're going to make it super uncool to own an ICE engine. And so, once the fashion moves that way, it's over. You'll be able to buy an electric Ford F-150 in next year, apparently, or maybe 2023. Everyone's going to be doing this. And so that gives me hope. And then the thought about like what Elon Musk said, where he makes it sound so simple. The solution to electricity is solar, wind, and storage. And it's the storage, the baseload supply. That's the tricky part. That once we get the baseload supply, coal is completely irrelevant. Even Australia will move away from coal because it'll be too expensive. And so, I do kind of fall into the Jeremy Rifkin Green New Deal theories there, where capitalism will kind of take the lead and actually bring us there. So it seems like it's doable.
I have a slightly different perspective, but I do agree with you that it is doable. The largest offender in terms of vehicle emissions is the U.S. military. It's not the civilian population by a large margin.
Really, huh? Wow.
And so but the fact is that the U.S. military is funded by the taxpayers. And so I think that every government, but especially the U.S. government, should simply mandate first that all non-combat government vehicles have to be EV by 2035. End of story. Just like, and for combat, let's say 2045. And if we just had that commitment alone, you would see emissions drop dramatically.
Well, I mean, I would guess that if you go by, Tesla's proof of being the fastest, car, electric vehicles will be superior. So that.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. Yeah, exactly. There's no question. It's a completely doable goal, but I just don't believe that dumping it on the backs of consumers is the answer, right? I mean, the fact is that the taxpayers have been footing the bill in so many different ways for just unconscionable abuse. And here's one way that the taxpayers can say, you know what, hang on a minute, maybe I can still, while my finances are getting in order, I can still hang on to my tiny little gas car for another couple of years if the U.S. military moves over at roughly the same pace as the rest of the population. Yeah. And if that were recapitulated, so that, Mexico and Canada and China and Russia, if they all did that one thing, then I think we would see just this huge shift in emissions.
I think it's going to happen. I have hope in my mind at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot we can do, and we should always be doing it. By the same token, even if we just, if someone waved a magic wand and all emissions stopped, there's no chance in hell that we're going to keep to the 1.5 degrees. It isn't going to happen.
I don't agree with that, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, it was just the issue is that every single model has been orders of magnitude off in terms of actual recorded data. The most pessimistic
I know.
models have been, like factors of 10 off in terms of how bad the situation actually is.
So the
Sure. I mean,
CO2
yeah, and things tend to come before they were predicted to come.
So the CO2 in the air right now is it's already going to push past the 1.5 degrees. Is that it?
That's what
Yeah.
Greg thinks. I don't think that, but I mean, I still think that there is hope to limit it, because I believe that there will be new inventions and new technologies and unprecedented things that we haven't realized yet. That's what I'm banking on. I know that's probably not a very good idea, but I just
Well,
believe that.
the aliens are also going to show up and save us too, so you don't have to worry.
Well, thanks.
But
use
no,
that
I
to
think there's
keep
more
myself.
there's more validity to faith in human ingenuity and technology than aliens. I can see
I do
Nora's
think
point.
like the likelihood that we'll blow past it is very high. I'm just not willing to
Yeah.
say it's a certainty yet.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you. I understand. I just the changes that we're going to see, even if everything were just perfect tomorrow, are
Sure.
still the misery and suffering is
For sure.
unconscionable. And
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
and that's all I'm saying is like we have to work as hard as we can to slow things down, and we also have to work as hard as we can to make sure that there's landing pads for people, and that there's a way to replace the stressed out and failing infrastructure and all of those things.
Yeah. And how to work together globally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's crazy. I agree with you though that with your general sentiment though that like, things are going to be much, not necessarily worse, but more complicated than we thought. And I think all these systems that we've built our societies on, supply chains, the environment, government, all this stuff that's super inextricably linked. I think when those systems start to go, I think it becomes much more complicated than we realized before. And I don't think people necessarily, like, if you just look at like how COVID disrupted supply chains now, I mean, I don't think that was people did not expect all the shortages of all these random things and how that was going to drag the economy and all that stuff. Like, that is a very tiny sort of glimpse into how disruptive the climate can be when the climate is not stable. You know what I'm saying?
Agreed. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And the thing that I get most concerned about is that, even when we have a period of relative leisure, right? We're not in the middle of a world war. We're not in the middle of some existential crisis that's like right at our doorstep. We can't really get along, and we can't agree, and we have a hard time, marshaling our forces in one direction. And so, but now imagine when there is enormous stress. Imagine when, the government is failing, and the reason the government is failing is because the infrastructure is crumbling and people are starving and they can't get food, they can't get water, they can't get shelter, right? So are they more likely to be able to sit down and have a reasoned conversation about, what we should be doing? It seems that they will be less likely for that to happen. That what's more likely to happen is falling back to tribalism, falling back to distrust, falling back to, a lot of instinctual patterns that are not going to be conducive to the kinds of, higher cognitive function that we'll need to get out of the mess. That's my biggest concern. Is that as things get tougher, it's just like, you can see it on a simple scale, right? As things get tougher, If the couple has the ability to work together, their marriage is going to make it. As things get tougher, if the couple starts to get more and more aggressive towards each other, or fall into unproductive communication patterns, the marriage is not going to make it. And there's lots and lots of studies on this. So this is kind of what I'm looking at when I look at globally. What's the trend? The trend is we're going to be stressed out. Every nation state is going to be stressed out beyond anything they've ever seen before. And are they going to be able to come together and work? Well, but if we judge by the Paris Accords, probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a shame. I mean, it's amazing how much time has passed. The Paris Accords were before Donald Trump, and here we are after, and it's like, okay, that all that time went by, But luckily now we have a president who cares about that stuff. So that will at least help a little.
Yeah.
But it's tricky situation. I mean, I don't really know how we're going to find a way to, meet those targets, but I think, I'm not really sure what to say, but I'm hoping that people see that it's really, really important that we try,
I agree. And I don't mean to be a downer. I'm just also trying to be clear-eyed about the situation, right? I want to have a sense of what we're up against.
Yeah, and your points are so well taken as far as what is urgent right now is to figure out how we can all get along together as a species, because these events are already happening. They're going to be on the increase, like you say, even if we stopped CO2 right away. And we need to solve xenophobia. We need to solve our cultural differences. We need to figure out how to connect with each other in a deeper and more profound way and unite against the common enemy, which is our past selves. And how do we do that? It's it's why I'm here at RChain, because I do think that RChain can provide an actual solution, at least a big part of it, and so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I keep insisting that RChain is not just the technology, it's the network.
Yeah.
And it's not just a network of machines and programs that are running on those machines. It's the network of people who have been tested, right? In some sense, all the hardships that RChain has suffered, it's peanuts by comparison to the hardships we are all going to suffer collectively. And if we learn to use these hardships to become better at working together and learn how to trust each other, then we will have made the best of our situation and the best of our differences. And when I look at how the community has come together, that's where I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of people rising to the occasion and saying, actually, we can work through this. And that's the kind of spirit that we're going to have if we don't I'm not worried about life on Earth. I think life on Earth will be fine with or without the humans. So, without the humans, there will be more life on Earth. But if we want the humans, and we want the humans to not be, the scattered tribes with very little in the way of what they had as a culture, then we have to learn not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to find a way to work together and cooperate so that we can preserve what is good about human culture. And there's a lot that's good about human culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me of an amazing scene in one of David Attenborough's most recent films, which is on Netflix, I believe. I think that's where I saw it. I think it's called A Life on Our Planet, but I'm not sure. It's more of like an autobiographical film, and he really talks about his journey throughout his whole life and how the planet has changed during his life exploring it. And And I remember there's a scene that he goes to Chernobyl and he walks around Chernobyl, and there's trees and plants, and the whole place has like bloomed. It's so weird because there's grass growing and trees growing and inside like every single building, every stairway, every doorway. It's so weird. It looks like a video game, but it really shows how resilient nature can be when you leave it alone. And there's all this wildlife just trotting down the street, which of course is not a street anymore. But it's a really interesting scene, and I think he, showed that to illustrate to people what you were just saying about how, life will find a way on Earth, but it's up to us if we want to be part of that or not.
Yeah. Well
Really
said.
powerful scene. I highly recommend people watch it. I was really shocked because it honestly, it's amazing. That's all I can say. It's amazing.
Well, maybe that's the best note to end on right there.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all for a great conversation today. Hopefully we can discuss the Pat Metheny video next week.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao, ciao.